Hey guys, welcome to episode 108 of Meeple to Meeple. As always, I remain PJ. And unfortunately, there's no Gareth with us. Today is a very interesting episode. It's one that has had a lot of problems. It's had a lot of challenges. But you know, when you're trying to unite meeples around the world, there are always challenges. So this is the second recording of this interview that just did not go right for Gareth and I before the holiday season. But I am happy to have with us again the reprise of Josh Wood from AEG Games. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing good. It's been a crazy month or so for me, but I'm glad that we get to do this again. I think this
Yes.
is going to be great. We're going to just nail it more the second time.
Yeah.
So
There you
we
go.
got it.
So yeah, it's like we recorded this back in November. We had some technical issues. Then it was Thanksgiving, and then you went to PAX Unplugged, and then the holidays, and then recently you just you had to evacuate from the fires, right?
Yeah. I evacuated from the fires. So I was in a hotel, and then now I'm here in Atlanta. So I've been just bouncing all around.
Right.
But sometimes you have to travel. So,
Right.
is that a good segue?
That is a great segue. Which is why you're here. You're here to talk about what I think my prediction is that your game, Let's Go to Japan, is definitely going to be a nominee for the Spiel des Jahres for this year. I think it's definitely made it into Gareth and I's top 10 for games for 2024 that were released in 2024. It hit the table so many times. Both Gareth and I think, and a lot of our friends who are always posting. I know there's a lot of folks interested in this conversation, and I think that this is going to be exciting. So before we dive into it, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into the hobby, how'd you become a game designer and publisher?
Yeah, I think I think I a little background. I work for AEG. I guess that's more of the middle of the story. But I think like a lot of us, we always like gaming, and then we get into the hobby of games.
Right.
I got in around like 2003 when I first was in college, and I think like at all points, gamers decide, or a certain number of game designers go, I wonder if I could make a board game. And I tried doing that, and I sold my first game to AG, and then they gave me a shot at being a developer for Tiny Towns,
Yeah.
and then they hired me full time. So now I work full time for AG, so I get to do design work and development work, and that's the sort of my story.
So when did you started in the hobby in 2003? When did you go on board AEG as a full-time staff?
Uh, 2018,
Okay. So
yeah.
pretty recent.
So I started with it, yeah, because Cat Lady came out in 2017. I think I sold it to them. Um, I think the crazy story about Cat Lady is I sold them Cat Lady in January of 2017, and it
Yeah.
came out later in 2017. And that kind of stuff never happens. Usually, when you sell a game, it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years plus for it to come out.
Right.
But I actually did the artwork for Cat Lady, but that was just
Okay.
prototype art.
Right.
And so I had planned for them to find their own artists and everything. And, usually there's a development cycle, but they're like, look, we think that this game is fully developed. We love the art. We want to do it. And I was like, but I was not confident with my art. I was like, oh, maybe we should hire a professional artist to put like
Right.
good artwork on instead of my artwork. Then they offered me a little bit more money to use my artwork. And I was like, okay, I guess we'll roll with my artwork.
There it is. That's awesome. So Let's Go to Japan is your what what is it? Your
Third, it's my
third?
it's my third solo game, yeah, or my third game, yeah. I do design on like the expansions for Tiny Towns and stuff, but if you
Right.
just talk about standalone games that are Josh Wood products, it's Cat Lady, then Santa Monica, and now Let's Go Japan.
Santa Monica's got quite a following, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's great. All three of my games have had a good following. People come up to me and tell me that they like the various games that I've created, and I just appreciate any time someone says nice about the work I do.
Absolutely.
I'm always happy with the products I put out. Otherwise, like I wouldn't put them out. And so when people kind of tell me that they like them, it makes me very happy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we get to, I guess, you're planning a trip to Japan in 2020, right?
hmm
Um, you've got Santa Monica and Cat Lady under your belt. People know who you are. And then the pandemic hits. Walk us through kind of how you approached making this game and tying it to your plans for your travel to Japan.
Yeah, I mean, when the pandemic started, I was supposed to go to Japan April 1st. And so it was just a few weeks after lockdowns when we were supposed to go. So we had to cancel
Right.
that trip. And there was this kind of bargain, I guess, that I made with myself to like make myself not feel so bad about missing that trip that maybe if I made a game about it, I wouldn't feel like if I made a game about the trip I was going to take, it would maybe make me feel like the trip actually happened, or it was like a way
Okay.
to put, to still like make that trip happen in some way, shape,
Right.
or form.
Sure.
And look, obviously, game designers, they all decided to sort of try to make games during the pandemic, right? Like,
Yep.
you've had more free time and stuff like that. And this was a great project for me to do. I had already done so much research on Japan, and then I just did even more. I even learned how to speak Japanese during that time period. So I really
Wow.
went all in because it was just like, well, I'm just going to put everything I could into this game. And so that's what I did.
So so the lockdown is announced. You're canceled. Your trip is canceled. How long from that point till you start developing it into a game? How long did that take? And was it like in a week you were like, well, I got to turn this into a game, or like how long did that process take? I guess, and then emotionally, mentally, like all that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So if the lockdown started, I'm guessing sometime in March, if I recall.
I think so, yes.
And I think what happened was April 1st arrived,
Mm.
and I said to my partner, like, well, we'd be getting onto a plane to Japan
Yeah.
right now. And then I think when our return date hit, which was like 10 days later, so like April 10th or 11th, and I was like, can you imagine we would be getting home from Japan right now? And around that time, I think is when I started going like, I think it's possible I started to think about the idea, but I think that's when I was like, I think I just got to do this. And like I said, just really committed to it.
So
And I gotta say, like a huge thank you to AEG, because I kind of just told them. Usually, game designers, we make a game and then
right.
we work on it for a long time and then we pitch it. I kind of just said to AEG like, "Hey, I kind of want to make this game," and then they're like, "Yeah, try and make that game." And I mean,
Okay.
they're like, "We'll see what happens."
Right.
But they kind of gave me a lot of space to work on it, which was really nice of them.
Cool. That's awesome. So you get the concept and development. Is it natural for you whenever you have some sort of life experience? A trip is canceled, you go to a party, whatever experience. Is it natural for you as a game designer to think, I need to make this into a game? Or did that take some sort of leap for you to?
Yeah, it's interesting. Designers are usually described as being mechanics first, theme second, or theme first, design second. And
Right.
so I think I just run through both those in my head at the same time, and then eventually, like they just kind of click in my mind. So, for instance, with Santa Monica, I knew I had this idea to make a Tableau game where you made a big, like a card stacked on, like kind of panorama
Right.
that you would finish the game with, and I wanted people to be like moving around in the environment, but I like didn't know what the theme I was going to do. And then I was at the beach one day. Ironically, I was a few miles north in Malibu, and I was at a beach there, and I thought like how beautiful it looked, and I said, oh, I wonder if I could do this, and
Sure.
that's maybe the best way I can explain it, is that like I think about both things. This one was a little bit more theme first. It's because
Mhm.
it's like, well, I know it's going to be Japan. I know what you're going to be planning a trip, which is a mechanical thing, but it's also the thematic thing. And so a lot of the mechanisms are informed by the theme. In fact, something that's kind of weird is there's times when you're making a game like Let's Go Japan where people go, well, why can't you have a card that scores you points based on this? And I'm like, well, that doesn't really exist. It's like, people are like,
Sure.
oh, what you really need is like more like shopping nature experiences in the game. I'm like, well, there's not a lot of shopping nature experiences in real life because those
Right.
two are a little bit diametrically opposed. There is in the game a very famous mall that has like a park on top of it, and that's like one of the only shopping nature cards in the entire game. So
Hmm.
if someone says like, "Hey, I want more of this in the game," it's like, well, too bad. It's got to like fit the source material, and you can try to fudge it a little bit, but to me, it was really important to get everything right.
Right.
Like I didn't want it coming out and people going like, well, it's not really like that. So that was important. So I tried to like not break those rules as much as
Right.
possible.
So you had said your original trip was for 10 days. 10 days, I think you said you were gonna
Yeah.
you were intending to stay there for 10 days. So then the game itself is over 6 days, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me about that. Why 6 and not the full 10?
So for me, it made sense to make it 7. So 10 days would play, I think, too long, and you would need so many more cards for the deck.
Okay.
And so 7 made the most sense. It's a week. It's very balanced. It's very harmonious. And then I think in playtest, I just realized like someone just said, why don't you try shortening it like by 2 days and seeing what happens?
Yeah.
And then I shortened it 1 day because I was like, well, I don't know about that. And I shortened it 1 day and I was like, oh, it's a little bit smoother. And so it kind of just stayed that way. So that's the
Okay.
reason. It felt like that's a way that the game, mechanics dictated
Right.
the decision overall.
So this just proves your point that you as a designer balance theme and mechanics, and this is exactly what happened in the final product, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what about so you obviously did a lot of research because these cards are just magnificent and they're all real places that you were intending to go. There's you play 3 cards per day, right?
Mhm.
And you're traveling between Tokyo and Kyoto, possibly back and forth, depending
Mhm.
upon how the cards play in front of you. Why 2 cities and not just say Tokyo and do let's go to Tokyo? Why the 2? Was that because it was a reflection of what your trip was going to be, or is that
Yeah, that's exactly right. So 2 things. One, I was going to go to Tokyo and Kyoto.
okay?
And also, that's kind of the 2 cities most people go on their first trip to Japan.
Okay.
And they're very much different cities, even though that they're 2 of the biggest cities. And something that maybe people don't know when they play Let's Go Japan, there's the different icons. And so there's more shopping and food cards in Tokyo,
Mm-hmm.
and there's more nature and shrines in the Kyoto deck.
Sure.
And because that's actually how it is. Like when you go to Kyoto, it's more about seeing the famous temples and shrines. It's more about seeing things like cherry blossoms or kind of it's not as busy of a city.
Right.
Where if you go to Tokyo, there's a lot more shopping opportunities, and it has the most Michelin star restaurants. And so you can get great food everywhere in
Sure.
Japan. But that's why you kind of do that breakdown. So it was kind of a fun way to show 2 different types of decks that are similar but different. There's
Right.
definitely experiences of both in each deck, but there's just more of each of those types.
Right.
So, and I think that trains are actually like a really important part of like kind of going to Japan. So it was kind of fun to kind of put a train mechanism in the game.
Right. So that's cool. So this game last year in April, I traveled to England, and it was the first time that Gareth and I got to meet in person. The very first game we played at his house was Let's Go to Japan. He had the Kickstarter exclusive with the porcelain cups and the neoprene mats. Was beautiful. It was a great experience. So thank you for that. But it was
Thank the graphic designers and the
Yeah.
artists who are like in Japan.
Oh, okay.
All the artists are like Japan-based artists, and so
Okay.
they really make the game like look good. That and our graphic designer Bridget, she's amazing. But
Awesome.
sorry, continue with your story. I just want to make sure I got that in there.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thank you to the Japanese and graphic designers and artists for that, because it really comes through. It has a unique look to it compared to other board games in our collections. But so I had just come back from 4 days in London, and now I'm in Southampton where Gareth lives. And so naturally, as we're playing the game, we were talking about how this could easily become a let's go to London or a let's go to Chicago. You could pick different tourists. And we talked a little bit about this in our previous our first try at this interview, right? It's like, could you do you foresee doing other things? One of the things I noticed, and I really want to get your input on this, is when I have conversation with people about this game and we talk about they could do this and this, it's always a single city. Let's go to London, let's go to New York, let's go to Berlin, let's go to Paris, right? But the key to this game is there's two cities. And so talk about that and how you would see any future iterations of this game. Let's go somewhere else.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So let's say I wanted to do let's go to France next. The problem is that with France, you're going to mostly go to Paris, and Paris has enough things to support a
Right.
big deck. And there are other great places to go. You can go into the Normandy region, you could go out to Strasbourg, but like for instance, I couldn't make a Strasbourg deck because you kind of go for the Christmas markets, for instance.
Right.
Or like if there is another big city, it's kind of far away. It's not something you can hop back and forth on. In fact, your next big closest city is actually London. And then
Right.
it's like, well, do you do like let's go to Europe and then you're just going to London and Paris? That sounds weird.
Yeah.
So, I do foresee sometimes like but you can find examples where you could do it. You could do Italy and you can make it Florence and Rome. You could do Venice and Rome. You could do Florence and Venice, or maybe all three of those.
Right.
There are ways to do it, but there's also maybe ways that, because if I make like another Let's Go game, and what we've been talking about is a couple things. One, it's got to be something that I'm interested in doing the research for, because
Sure.
I want to make sure I keep that authenticity. And then two, like I feel okay with changing the mechanism. So maybe the trains can come out, and then maybe I can put something else back in that makes you feel like a diversity of areas, something like we did with the Day Trips expansion. Because, Let's Go Japan, there was the Day Trips expansion that allows you to go to Osaka or Nara or Yokohama, right? Because I knew there's going to be some people who are like, I really want to have this place in there.
Right.
And let's face it, there's a lot of great places to go to in many countries. So, I think you just have to, you have to just try to like weigh what people are expecting versus what can you give them that's new. How can we change the game? What can we do differently? Because also like, it's like if you just kind of just change the art and the names of the titles, it's not going to be that exciting. You have to kind of give something new. Like I really like how the Great Western Trail games work, for instance, on giving you something kind of new but familiar each time. And so I think that's the approach I would take.
Is there any plans for a future iteration of a Let's Go 2 in the future? Something you're working on? Something you're just having conversations with AEG about?
Yeah, we're having conversations about places that we could go. Are we thinking like more abstract things? Someone at my company is like, why couldn't we do Let's Go to the Moon? And it's all about the space race.
Sure.
That was a little too abstract for me, but I don't know. Like, if I have the idea, I could do that.
Right.
So we have had a lot of conversations about like what places would work, what like mechanisms would need to change. So there's like a blueprint of like what could work. Right now, we're just really excited about Let's Go Japan. We really are trying to get the message out about the game, having people play it. The game is less than 1 year old, so we're still just trying to make sure we give it all the love. But we're, and plus I can't help but think about things whenever I travel. I went to London last year. I went to France last year. I went to Thailand last year. And yes, every single second I was in those places. I'm like, how would I do? Let's go to Thailand. Like, could I put rickshaws in the game? And so it gets into your brain. You're always like thinking like, what could I do?
So I'm curious. It's kind of a two-part question. What was your favorite element, your favorite experience of developing the game? And the second part is, what was your favorite, or what is your favorite card or location in the game?
It's both good questions. So while making Let's Go Japan, there was kind of two little breakthroughs. One was kind of coming up with the idea of the highlight of the day, which is if you've collected a certain number of symbols, you get to score a bonus at the end of the day that you chose. So that was a really cool thing that I learned, or that we discovered. But I think for me, the concept of the walks are really interesting
Mm,
because they add to sort of that story that you get to tell at the end of the game.
yes.
Because we had the story at the end of the game, and it actually always started with like a story you told at the end of the game. But I think that it was like kind of clunky, and then I streamlined it all away. And then I was like, well, I want there to be decisions and things that are surprises happening, because that's a big thing about being on vacation. You have certain surprises. You go out. When I was in Japan, I was at the Sensoji Temple, and I've been to the Sensoji Temple. It's a big temple. It's beautiful. It's great. And then as I was like, I went around a corner and they had like a baby crying competition going on, and I didn't
Okay.
know that was going to be going on. Yeah, they have like these. It's very interesting. They have these babies come in and like their parents hold them, and then a guy tries to make scary faces at them, and whichever one cries first wins, I believe, or maybe you lose because you're about trying to be brave. I don't quite remember.
Okay.
Um, so like I didn't know this was a thing, and I just stumbled upon it.
Sure.
And that's like the thing with the walks is that you put these face down cards
Yeah.
and then you flip them over and you're like, oh, I was here and then I ran into this thing and I decided to stay and do it. It's a thing that's like unscheduled. So that was the biggest breakthrough. My favorite card in the game is probably the Kokodera Temple.
Kokodera
I
Temple.
Yeah, there's only one of it in the game, and it gives you two nature. It gives you a temple and a unique experience icon. And so it gives you a lot of icons. It doesn't give you any points, and it costs you money. Um, but it's a good card to kind of set you up for like later on in the game if you play it early, or you can play it for its final scoring thing, and it scores I think for nature and unique experiences. So
Hmm.
there's like a really fun route that I like to take if I get that card early. That's one of my favorite cards of the game. And I went there in real life, and it's a really cool experience to actually have. It's this temple, Kokodera, uh, means moss temple in Japanese.
Okay.
That's actually just its colloquial name. It's got a
Right.
different name. Saihoti, I think is what it's called. Um, but Kokodera is what they call it, which means moss temple. And it's because it's got these like hundreds of different species of moss around there. And to get a reservation, you actually have to mail them a postcard. There's a way
Okay.
to do it online, but for the longest time, you had to like mail them a postcard. And so it's like a very unique thing to do when you're in Japan to try to like get this reservation before you go by sending them a postcard and just seeing what happens.
Interesting.
And so like what I think about that card a lot, and the experience of it. So that's probably my favorite card in the game. It's tough to choose.
Oh, I get it. I understand. No, that's why I asked the difficult questions. What was, if anything, was probably the most surprising in the course of the development of the game from concept to finish? Was there something that just stuck out to you like, whoa, that I didn't expect that, or
I mean, that's tough. A lot of things happen when you're designing a game
yeah,
that surprise you. There was a time when I felt like everything was just not going to work out. And then just the whole process, when it starts to work and you go, oh, I like this. And there becomes a time when you get close to finishing a game and you play the game 100 times or more, and when you actually have that feeling, like you're like, oh, I just want to play this game. Like Let's Go Japan is now on Board Game Arena,
yep,
and I enjoy just going on Board Game Arena and playing it. It's just still like a lot of fun. So I think the most surprising thing for me is just how much I've enjoyed. Here's the most surprising thing. This is technically after the game, but I
okay,
was very surprised at how much during the Kickstarter the comments weren't like, why is shipping this much? Or, like things that people talk about that,
right,
like, what are you trying to do? I don't want porcelain bowls or whatever. But it was mostly focused around, hey, I had the same story happen to me. I didn't get to go to Japan because of the pandemic. People were like, I had a
wow,
canceled trip. I went to Japan. I saw this place. I love, people tell me all their stories about going to Japan or similar places that they were going to go to. I think that's the most surprising is just how much that people were able to connect with the theme and the story, because originally the title of the game was going to be called My Trip to Japan, because it was all
okay,
about my trip that I didn't get to take.
sure,
and then I felt like that was a bit maudlin or whatever. So I just was kind of like, let's go to Japan to make it more fun and exciting because it's everybody's trip.
Right.
Everyone's coming along. And it turned out that's kind of the true thing. Everyone is, has been, couldn't go, wants to go. I mean, obviously not everyone, but
Right.
it's amazing how many people are like, wow, like I'm going to Japan soon. And I'm like using your cards as like a way to learn more about the cities we're going to.
Definitely, I think that's what makes this game stand out from so many others is because you're interacting with very real locations and a very real culture that you could plan a trip to Japan by using the components and the cards in your game. You can be like, okay, I can plan this and, think about that. Do you have, for anyone who's either hasn't played the game yet or is new to the game, or even our seasoned, I think we had an episode where we talked about the emerging qualities in games when playing them multiple times and how different strategies kind of rise to the surface in playing a game over and over. Do you have any strategies, any tips for players when they're playing Let's Go to Japan?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of like little subtle things that you can learn
Sure.
from playing it. It's a game that I think some people will play and go, again, I match the icons and I just do my best or whatever. But there's a lot of strategies that you can do. So one that I love to do is early in the game, if I don't have like if I see a great card that I want to be my final scoring card, so that's usually something that's going to score me at least 20 points potentially.
Mm-hmm.
I will play it. If not, I actually might just take those cards and discard them and put walks down on the day that wants green symbols, because then you can get some research tokens so you can start looking for certain cards later. And then also you're still contributing towards the final goal for that day, which is to try to match the icons on that day. That's a really good strategy that I think that a lot of people will get better at if they can kind of like learn how to do that.
Excellent. So take a walk. Do not underestimate the role of the research tokens.
Yeah, it's because when you take a walk,
Mm-hmm.
you get a research token, and so it's like a good way to get to kind of to slow play the game, because it actually is sometimes good to not commit hard to a strategy early on because you don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
So it's like kind of good to kind of like wait and build up a little bit. And that's why it's important to be able to change your goal by sticking the card on top. It's like, okay, I don't feel like I'm getting enough food for this strategy, so I'm going to change it to more shopping. I think that's my big thing is like, don't rush in, just kind of like let the game kind of build itself. And then there's a certain time where you need to transition from casually playing it to like focusing on what you're doing.
That's great. I hope you guys are listening. That's great because I have to admit I often overlook the role of the research tokens, and that's good. That's definitely great. Something to keep in mind. Do you have any tips, design insights for any up and coming or new board game designers, or just people who are thinking about designing their first game? Anything that you would want them to know that you've learned?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing about um, being a game designer is get the game out of your head. A lot of times people go, well, hold on, I just need to think about it for a couple more months, or like, wait, well, like in my head, this doesn't quite work. And the fact of the matter is that you just got to get something to work. Like if it's not working perfectly in your head, put it to paper, play it, because then it will help the ideas come more. Play testers will help you and say like, oh, well, I didn't find this working. So Let's Go to Japan originally had dice rolling in it.
Oh, really?
And like it's something you would never think based on what happened. And it was like
Right.
a way to kind of represent, fortune and misfortune. And like in Let's Go Japan, you also had a budget. You started with just like a certain number of like yen symbols, and every card had a cost. And so you deplete your like money as you were playing.
Sure.
And I thought like, oh, this is a way to make the game have a lot of texture, and because for me, right, Let's Go Japan is a little bit of an exercise that a lot of games are doing right now. It's what like Arc Nova and Wingspan do, which is cards have a lot of icons and a lot of different abilities on them. So each card can mean a lot, right? Like the wingspan of every bird is written in Wingspan, and it doesn't necessarily come into play that often. But when it kind of feels nice, like you feel like, okay, this is a real bird, someone took the time, did the research. You know,
Right.
like Elizabeth definitely sat down and knew what she was doing. And so I thought if I had like, there was a whole bunch of things in there. Like I had specific cards can be played on certain days because that thing is actually closed every Monday. So I was like, great, I'll put that in there. And then I had money cost, and like it was also though like then too stressful. And
Mm,
so there still has to be a little bit of like let's make this a fun experience, not like
right.
homework.
So what do you say to someone who's thinking about making a game and they're like, but I don't have the card stock. I don't have the equipment to print anything. Like, it's like it's not going to look good the first time. What would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, my first prototype of Cat Lady and Santa Monica, and I'll use Santa Monica as a bigger example because that game really relies on having art on all the cards because
Sure.
of like how it builds the panorama. I hand drew scribbles for the waves and everything. I hand drew every single card on pen, and I bought blank cards online for like $15. You don't have to dive in expensively. And in fact, I wouldn't worry so much about thinking about graphics and art really early on. Think about things that are clean and concise that make sense. But actually, what's going to happen is you're going to throw away so many copies of your game. You're just going to make something and go, you're going to like spend like 5 hours making your game or whatever, 10 hours. And then you're just going to throw it away or half of it away, or you're just going to take some like white out and just write over it or scratch out something. Like you're just gonna you got to get used to. It's like everything can't be sacred to your prototype. It's just a
Right.
prototype. Your prototype is eventually going to get thrown away. Or if you're a crazy person like me, like I still have some of my original prototypes
Yeah.
just to show people like, look, this is what it looks like. It's messy. It's weird, but you do it.
I'm so glad you said that. I had a playtesting experience at Gen Con. I do a lot of playtesting, and we were playtesting a game, and the cards were beautiful. They were glossy. The artwork, I mean, it looked like that the designer was ready to launch, Kickstarter, retail, whatever. I was like withholding my comments. The game had problems mechanically, but it was beautiful. He left to take a break, came back, and so we asked him, "Is like, so what draft are you on?" He's like, "This is my second draft," and I'm like, "Oh, so you're early in the development?" I was like, "Whew, okay." He spent so much time on the making it look good that I was worried like my input's not going to be helpful, and then it's like, okay, yeah. So I would say definitely don't worry about what it looks like.
Yeah, unless
Just
you're like a very like seasoned
sure.
designer who gets to like stage like 3 quicker than everyone else.
Hmm.
Early on, you've got to just know that your stuff like just
Yeah.
like you don't need to put artwork on it unless it's like a game that's crucial about having artwork.
Right.
Just it's fine. Text boxes is what we need. Simple icons that people can follow. Yeah, you don't actually and actually you're going to be less it's going to be less useful for you because I think like you just said you were like worried about giving comments
Hmm.
because you're like, oh, I don't want to upset this person. Now I believe playtesters should always like even if I mean look even if a game is like I'm like okay we are about to send this to press like
Yeah.
maybe that's the only time that you should be like okay I want to make these massive changes. If you have something like hey, maybe this should be blue because instead of green because
Right.
it was a little bit hard for me to see. Playtesters can always feel free to just say what needs to be said. And sometimes, like you said, things look too nice. People are a little bit scared to
Right.
say things. So
Right.
don't be precious. Love your game and keep loving your game. Try to find the reasons why you love your game and keep that true when you're making your game.
Mm.
But don't be so precious about anything in particular because there was things that I really wanted to keep in Let's Go Japan. Like I fought really hard to keep the money in the game. People told me a couple times like to try taking it out, and I was like, I don't want to remake every single card without the money. And like I did all that research, and I just think it's right, and it gives all these texture to these cards because you
Mm.
can see that this thing is like, and like I still kept it in. Like there's
Sure.
expensive cards, and
There are.
there's cards that wear you down, but there's like cheap cards or whatever. But it was like this whole track, and I just was like, I don't want to get rid of it. And then I
Mhm.
got rid of it, and I said, I'm really glad we got rid of it.
Yeah.
Maybe that was a big surprise that happened to me during
Okay.
the making of the game. That I mean, like I was so sure. In fact, like I feel like it was another AEG employee who kept telling me to do it. It was Neil Kimball, the designer of Sheepy Time,
Yeah.
and he kept telling me like to take it out. I'm sure there's other people that told me to take it out, but he was like very adamant about it. And just I was like, fine, Neil, I'm going to show you that you're wrong. I took it out, and then it was great, and I was like, oh, okay.
That's amazing. I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, what would this game look like with money involved? Like as a player, I think it would make me nervous because like I got to watch my budget, which of course we have to. That's a real
Yeah.
struggle when you travel.
Yeah,
wow.
and I mean, and that's actually what I was trying to simulate because
Right.
sometimes you go, okay, I'll pony up the dough to go to this like Michelin star restaurant, but you know what? We're staying in a less nice hotel,
Mhm.
or like we can't sit first class on the train. We got to
Right.
sit in the coach area.
Right.
Which, by the way, the trains in Japan are always nice. So,
Oh, well, there you go. See, hey, speaking of which, are there any future travel plans for you personally? Is AEG planning on sending you anywhere soon? Anything you can be looking forward to?
that's a good question. I mean, because of this game, I was able to go to Thailand last year, and then I went to Philly. I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping they send me to places. Especially like if we decide to do another Let's Go game, I'm like, can I convince them to send me to that place for research?
Right.
It would be for research, but you know, can I convince them to pay for it? We don't. They're not planning to send me anywhere specific. I mean, I probably will be back at Gen Con this year.
Okay.
I think I'll try to go back to PAX this year. I wonder if I could go to Gamma this year or something. I guess that's close, so maybe not.
Hey, speaking of PAX, how was that experience? I wasn't able to go, but I know you were there. How did that go?
Yeah, PAX was my first time going to PAX. It was my first time also being in Philly since I went to Philly when I was like maybe 8 or 9 or something.
Yeah.
So I had a different perspective on it, and it was a lot of fun to just see people that I usually don't get to see because you know people start to get in place of their conventions, and it's like, oh, some people only go to like PAX and this other one that I don't go to. It's like I go to PAX and Dice Tower, and it's like, well, I don't really go to those two, but you know.
I know. I know.
You have to like choose. I mean, like you know, luckily I get to go to a couple more to like work and you know run the booth, and it's always nice because when you have a game come out and you get to try to sell it to people and meet people. I mean, that was really nice. And we did a lot of cool stuff at the conventions last year. You know, we got some gachapon machines and we were giving out these little wooden figures of like onigiri rice balls and sushi and little tori gates. And that was
I got one.
Yeah, you got the tori gates. Nice. That's my favorite one. I love his little hands he's got.
Yeah, we got this at Gen Con, so
yeah,
we're really excited about that.
I drew all those too.
Did you?
Yeah, it was my kind of concept, and like I think once again I just like I kind of want them to look like this, and then people were like let's just use those, and I'm like, all right, let's do it.
Well, knowing that you drew this makes it even cooler. If I'm being honest, like that's kind of cool. It's not like some nameless person designed it, but no, that's cool. That's great.
Appreciate
it. What any future plans in terms of game titles that you can share with us coming from AEG 2025?
Yeah.
What should anyone be looking forward to?
Yeah, we got a lot of stuff in the works. We have some expansion stuff coming. So you're going to see another Tiny Towns expansion.
Okay.
You will see expansions to a lot of your favorite AEG games. But our next big Kickstarter, actually, I happen to have it here. This is Misfit Heroes.
Okay.
This is from Phil Walker Harding. This is a prototype, so you have to kind of forgive it a little bit. The thing that's really cool about it is that it's a card crafting game. So right here we see a Clever Spirit, and it is made up of a Clever card and a Spirit card. And so they combine to have like one ability and a second ability. And so what his kind of pitch was, he's like, oh, I kind of want to make like a TCG game, you know, a game with like 10,000 cards. But he's like, I can't design 10,000 cards.
Sure.
So like in this way, you know, with like 60 cards, you already have thousands of cards that could be created. And so it's a little tableau builder about kind of like putting people in like arrangements and stuff. it's a lot of fun. I'm very, very excited for people to play it. That Kickstarter to launch in March. I'm the
Okay.
developer on it, so
Okay.
I've been working really closely with it, and I'm really excited for it because it is. We hired this artist, and he's like super cool. I love his style. We're working on just making it the best game it could possibly be, and I think it's incredible. So
That's awesome.
that's what I like to pitch right
Yeah.
now.
Cool. Well, thanks. Thank you for sharing. That's great. So, you guys, if you're listening to this on podcasting, streaming services, you missed out. You're going to have to go to YouTube so you can see what he just showed us, a few little snippets. That was pretty great. So, where can folks find you and AEG on all the social media platforms?
Yeah, I'm on a lot of the social media platforms at Sir Josh Wood.
At Sir Josh Wood. I found you today. I
Okay,
added
great.
you on Instagram today.
Perfect. Yeah, Instagram is the one that I use the
Yeah.
most. Although I think it's been a little bit weird. I don't feel like I haven't posted quite enough on this trip. I haven't been playing enough board games actually the last
Well,
couple of weeks. So
you got a lot going
I'm
on, so.
I'm looking forward to getting back to playing some board games. So hopefully they'll come around soon.
Excellent. Well, guys, thanks for listening. Josh, thanks for joining me and everything we've been dealing with, trying to get you on the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave comments below. If you have questions for Josh, he'll be able to see them in the YouTube channel. Everybody, thanks a lot. Josh, all of our prayers and thoughts with you and the AEG family as you're dealing with all the fires in Los Angeles and the larger community in the LA area as well. So.
Hey, I appreciate you saying that, and thank you so much, and thank you for having me on the show. It was great.
No, this is fantastic. I appreciate it. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.